Hello. I will not comment on the rate because this decision is entirely political in nature. There is absolutely no economics in it at all, and therefore it's not my area. Yes, we have political analysts who can, with a smart look, explain exactly which political forces in our country are influencing this situation, or perhaps not in our country. As for the overall situation in the world, I would like to point out that all of this very much resembles the beginning of water boiling in a pot. You know, the number of bubbles that break away from the bottom and sides of the pot keeps increasing. They get bigger and bigger. Notice as well, the scale of provocations is also growing. As soon as China and India had talks in Beijing, events unfolded in Nepal. As soon as the United States hinted that they might intervene in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas, first there was a terrorist attack on Israeli territory, and then Israel struck the capital of the Arab state of Qatar. And at the same time, everything is arranged in such a way that it is absolutely clear the United States was involved, because otherwise the planes should have been shot down. And I'm not even mentioning the fact that someone refueled those very Israeli planes. And finally, the story in the United States, where a relatively young man is killed. I can't even say he was a politician. He was more of a public figure. Was Martin Luther King a politician? He was not involved in political activity. The man who was killed in the United States was 32 years old. It was still too early for him to come out into the open, into the official political sphere. But there's no doubt that in a few years he would have definitely made a name for himself. But I think he wasn't killed for that reason, but rather because, on the one hand, it creates a powerful pretext for Trump's team to do something about the liberals. On the other hand, it is, accordingly, a major blow to the liberals. At the same time, there is no certainty that Trump and the forces behind him actually want to completely eliminate the liberals. All the more so since, as of today at least, the situation with Fed board member Cook has not been resolved in any way. In other words, Trump hasn't managed to fire her yet. We'll see what happens next. There's still time before the Federal Open Market Committee meeting. By the way, it's actually pretty funny, right? They caught the person who was shooting, apparently, and now the question is, could it turn out like it did with President Kennedy, when the individual who was caught for allegedly shooting him was suddenly and very conveniently killed, or well, died? There you go. And accordingly, for this reason, it was very easy to make him a scapegoat. I absolutely do not rule out that a similar situation could happen here, especially since the mechanism has already been worked out. And digging into the details of who, how, and from where, that's a job for political analysts, and most importantly, it doesn't make any sense. But this clearly shows that we are facing an absolutely colossal and, frankly, uncontrollable rise in tension, because it's absolutely and unequivocally clear that all of the current and existing actors simply do not have the necessary time or capacity to adequately deal with this very important and pressing agenda. Well, that's just impossible even in real life. In other words, there haven't been this many large-scale events happening in such a short period, say within a week, for a very long time. And for this reason, we can almost certainly say that this situation will continue to escalate in the same way, and it will be extremely difficult to bring it to an end. If we are talking about our country, we can clearly see that there are still a whole bunch of different and quite varied aspects, ranging from all sorts of, well, rather aggressive mudslinging at each other, to the truly strange and somewhat bewildering interview with a certain very well-known and notoriously outspoken loudmouth, who, well, it's absolutely obvious she didn't genuinely come up with it herself. And just imagine how much incredible work and sustained effort it must have truly taken, given her current rather delicate state, to meticulously keep her going for what felt like endless hours and have her articulate something coherent and meaningful. For this particular reason, I am strongly inclined to genuinely believe that we have now come right up to some truly extremely dangerous and critical moments in time. I've talked about this, yes, and about a month ago, maybe a little more. I held webinars where I explained the situation we've reached, and I said that I can't guarantee that a collapse will happen very, very soon, but the likelihood of it happening is already quite high. There, roughly speaking, it was approximately 10 or perhaps 15%. But after this past week, it has become absolutely and unequivocally clear that the percentage is even significantly higher now, indeed. We also need to add all sorts of funny stories here, for example, related to the elections. Because, well, on my private channel, private because elections are going on, and as far as I understand, it's not allowed to post pre-election materials. Although, who knows what's in the legislation these days. But on the private channel, I'll post some very interesting debate speeches by Konstantin Antonov. He has appeared several times on numerous occasions on my Economics in Russian program. He sort of describes in a very detailed and comprehensive manner what the current situation actually looks like, specifically in the city of Novosibirsk. By the way, it's truly the third largest and most significant city in the entire country, indeed the bustling capital of all Siberia. And I can absolutely assure you that precisely the same pervasive level of categorical and unwavering refusal to effectively solve any pressing problems whatsoever exists in numerous other places and locations across the region as well. And by the way, it's certainly not just an isolated issue here in this particular spot. And this shows that in general everyone understands. Look, the most important and crucial quality for any official is a profound sense of danger. That is to say, an official will absolutely never do something that inherently puts himself or herself at any significant risk whatsoever. If officials start blatantly ignoring everything happening around them, it means only one thing. They understand that the model they exist in will soon come to an end. And for this reason, they feel they need to grab everything they can. And after that, they don't care what happens next. If you tell him, listen, but you'll end up in jail, he reasonably replies, are you crazy or something? You can't jail everyone, there are millions and millions of us, and accordingly, I'm so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Go ahead, jail this one, and that one. They'll never get to me. I don't even participate in the big schemes. And, it's absolutely impossible to break this logic. I see it now in a great many places. By the way, if you carefully look at budget games, say, for example, in the entire European Union, you will certainly see a very similar and comparable picture there as well. In general, I believe that this threat of collapse, not just economic but also political, has grown significantly, even compared to what it was just a month ago. God willing, this collapse won't be accompanied by wars. However, there will still be war somewhere, because it's already absolutely clear that a full-scale war in the Middle East is being prepared. Turkey, by the way, has already announced that if Israeli planes appear, they will shoot, which is quite funny because Israel is absolutely convinced that the US will support them. So what does that mean? A war between NATO members, between the US and Turkey? How could something like that even be organized? There you have it. But the fact that things are clearly heading in that direction is already absolutely obvious. When I talked about this a year and a half or 2 years ago, people told me, well, maybe it's an interesting idea, but how would you implement it? Now we see, right? The one that has already been struck. Who's next? In short, our lives are progressively becoming more and more astonishing, filled with remarkable advancements and unforeseen developments. And for this reason, the insightful advice I previously shared during the comprehensive webinar may now be even more profoundly relevant and critically important. Of course, there's no need to be afraid. But to everyone currently living in troubled areas, specifically in some European Union countries, in Israel, and in a few other particularly volatile places around the globe, I would strongly recommend considering the option of relocating for a very simple and compelling reason. If widespread mass riots were to suddenly break out, as they indeed did in Nepal, completely unexpectedly and seemingly out of nowhere, you could unfortunately end up suffering significant harm or distress even in seemingly harmless and previously peaceful situations that you had absolutely nothing to do with. You need to be mentally prepared for this. Yes, in our country the likelihood of this is lower, but generally speaking it's not zero. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.